Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. And how are you all doing as society crumbles? Great. Feels good, doesn't it? Or indescribable, murky, inchoate. I think those are better descriptors of the age. Oh boy, though. Gotta say, what a great episode you got in your ears right now. Today's guest is Ian MacKaye. Do I really have to read his bio? I will, anyway, just in case. Originally from Washington, D.C., Ian MacKaye is a guitarist and singer who founded Discord Records as a teenager in 1980 with Jeff Nelson. Ian and Jeff went on to form the defining D.C. hardcore band Minor Threat, and then in 1986, Ian formed Fugazi with Joe Lally, Brendan Canty, and Guy Pachotto. Over 20-plus years, the band has released 7 albums and toured the world extensively, covering all 50 United States, Europe, Australia, South America, Japan, and many points in between. Ian has also played with a number of other bands, including Teen Idols, Egg Hunt, and Embrace, and since 2001, he's played in The Evens, a duo with Amy Farina, and most recently the trio Koriki, whose first album was released just last summer. I gotta say, it's quite good. This is exciting. I've been a fan of Ian's music and just of the person he is since I was in high school. And we recorded this was right before the election, maybe a week or two. And it's funny. The first thing Ian said when he got on the Zoom was, I don't want to talk about Trump. And I said, very good. I never want to talk about him. It's a disgusting human. But I will say I'm pretty proud of myself. Ian is kind of a no bullshit kind of guy, not surprisingly. And I'm a kind of, what's a good phrase? All bullshit kind of guy. And usually also on someone who's not very effusive, I almost immediately start projecting my neuroses on them. I didn't do that this time. Although if you listen to my other podcast I do with my wife, Couples Therapy, we interviewed Tig Notaro a week or two ago. And I immediately, because Tig, very warm person, but not effusive, immediately started projecting my neuroses onto her. But man, we get into it. Talk about growing up in D.C. in the 60s and 70s, and just that kind of the atmosphere, both in the city and within his family, and how that kind of formed him. I won't say anything else. You'll hear it yourself in about 60 seconds. By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. If you want, all the episodes are up on Spotify, or you can download the MP3s at beginnings.libsyn.com. I've been doing this show for just about 11 years and talked to hundreds of musicians and writers and performers and filmmakers. Just recently, I talked to Mary Timony from Helium and Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. And speaking of Discord, Chad Clark from Beauty Pill. If you're into politics, I just talked to Chris Hedges. He's a wonderful left writer. But if you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, Spotify, like I said, I think Google, and tons of other places. Wherever you get your podcast from, you can find Beginnings. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. Twitter if you like stupid jokes. Instagram if you like cat pics or pics of my wife. Got some great episodes coming up, including Tobin Sprout from Guided by Voices, Joe Jack Talcum from Dead Milkmen, Bob Nastanovich of Pavement, Bobby Previtt. That was great. It's one of my favorite ones. Francis Quinlan from Hop Along, and tons of other great interviews. So stay tuned. I hope you are all staying mentally healthy. It's difficult right now. I'll tell you what, listening to podcasts, that's the thing that's been helping me stay sane. Anyway, speaking of listening to podcasts, let's listen to this one. And now, here's Ian. up in DC, and you kind of saw. I mean, you tell me, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, you kind of like grew up in a time when, culture was shifting, or you were becoming a teenager in a time when culture was shifting.
When would that be?
I would say, again, this is all like given to me through books and movies. So I don't have any direct access. So maybe it's just like, this is
Okay,
like
so
the
but- so
nostalgic view. But like in
when
the
do you-
60s into the 70s, like in the early 70s, like there's the story is that the post Watergate era. Like I just had Thurston Moore on, and we were talking a lot about like how like the political things that really influenced me when I was a kid were Sonic Youth and Fugazi, Minor Threat, and then get through that learning about hardcore. And that's the stuff that I think really started me on like a very left-leaning political path.
Mm-hmm.
And
so what's your question?
more of a prompt, but like I'm wondering what are the things, is this true? Were you witness to see this kind of cultural shift, especially living in DC? What are the things that kind of affected you?
Well, to
when you were
answer
growing
it,
up?
yeah, I mean, in retrospect, of course, I was present for a huge revolution in society, in American society, social, cultural, and social, of course, because we all know that, I was born in 1962. So, and I was in Washington, D.C., and my parents were involved with, left politics. And there was we were members of a sort of liberation theology Episcopal church that was deeply involved with social movements. It was called St. Stephen's and the Incarnation, and very involved with civil rights. Actually gave a huge parcel of land. It had a lot of land around the church, and gave it to back to the community as a form of reparations. It was in a black neighborhood and created low-income housing, but just gave literally and definitively as a form of reparations, gave the land to the people in the neighborhood to build low-income housing. They also had the gay marriage, or we were involved with the gay marriage in 1974. The first women to say mass came down to Washington. The first women, I think, were in Philadelphia, and then the second time they gave mass was at St. Stephen's Incarnation. And so there was a lot of really radical stuff going on. Now, I wasn't alive in the 50s, and I don't really remember the early 60s, so I can't say that I was aware of the fact that I was a part of this sort of huge upheaval. I just thought that's the way things were, perpetual chaos, because it was chaotic and it was scary. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, I was 6 years old, and the church was on a street called Newton Street, which is it's a long block between 16th and 14th Street. There's no 15th Street at that point. And 14th Street was sort of the epicenter of the rioting in Washington, D.C. I believe he was assassinated just before Palm Sunday, a few days before Palm Sunday in April. I think he was assassinated on April 25th, 1968. And for Palm Sunday, the priest, Bill Wint, he decided that we would have the service on 14th Street. So we, as a congregation, we marched down Newton Street, east on Newton, until we got to the 14th, and we made a right on 14th, and there were still police and fire, department people were there, and there was National Guard people there, and there was, I didn't see people throwing rocks, but I saw buildings smoldering because they burned the goddamn street. So many buildings got burned down, and we actually had a service right there on 14th Street. And my recollection was that it was in front of an abandoned house, and the porch of that house was used as a makeshift altar, where like a place where he was preaching from. And for music, there was a a blues singer named Mother Scott who was a member of our congregation, and she was for real. Like Mother Scott was really, you know, people in the blues community they know who she is, and she performed. She played guitar, and she sat. I remember sitting in a chair, I think on this porch. But mostly, what I really remember is that sense that the music she was playing created sort of a bubble. Like we all kind of moved forward to hear her. There's no amplification. And then that kind of huddling around uh, her music and the song itself just made me, I was terrified. So it made me feel safe. You know, it was really clear that music has this, for me at least, it has a really profound power. And in the face of chaos, in the face of danger and all the stuff, that you can actually have a sense of solidarity or connection as a result of music. So again, I didn't know that this wasn't the way things were usually.
Mm-hmm.
It just was the way it was. Washington was a very different city at the time. It really was. It was going through a huge upheaval with home rule. Washington was run by the federal government forever until the early 70s. And there was basically a commission, 3 commissioners ran the city. And then finally the people got to take it over. But that transition was hard. And there was a lot of, the city is mostly black. At the time, I think it was 70% black, chocolate city. So I was keenly aware of being a minority. But I didn't have I didn't understand. I wouldn't have understood what it would be like to live anywhere else. I never lived anywhere else. I don't have any idea what it would be like. And also there was chaos. Everybody was drunk. Everybody in my street was drunk. People in my family were drunk. Everyone was just out of their minds. And, the hippies were all, there were a lot of hippies and they were all high or drunk. I mean, friends of mine were getting high at 11 and 12 years old. It was, it was intense. It was a really intense time. And also another memory was in 1970. I had become really good friends with a group house at the end of half a block from my house on Beecher Street. And it was a bunch of kids, I think went to American University, maybe Georgetown University, but anyway, they're college kids. And they were all living together in this group house and they were hippies. They had, painted murals on their walls, and then they had crazy record collections, and, they were very, but they were hippies, and I loved them. And they were great to me. They actually really encouraged me to do all kinds of creative stuff. And but in May 4th, 1970 was the Kent State shootings, and the very famous photo of the woman screaming next to this poor kid who'd been shot dead, who was on the cover of Life magazine. The woman in that picture looked remarkably similar to my best friend at this house. And it really affected me because I realized, that it's not her, but it might as well be her. And that's who the government is fucking shooting. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that, yes, what was going on at the time, the Vietnam War, for instance, started, it was on my entire life at that point. And my rudimentary and childlike grasp of what the draft meant. My understanding was that when you turned 18, you just go right to war. I didn't understand that there was any other a selection process. I didn't know there was a way out of it. I just thought you turn 18 and boom, you go to war. So I would say, the Vietnam War ended when I was 12 years old. So up to that point, I basically assumed that I would be going to Vietnam.
Oh, God.
And I remember I remember once at a party at my parents' house, and, I said, I'm a pacifist. And they said, are you going to go? So you're going to go to Vietnam? I said, no, I'm a pacifist. And they said, well, what if you get, what if you have to go because you're drafted? I said, I'm not going. And they said, what if they come to find you? I said, I'll hide in the closet. They said, what if they find you in the closet? I said, I'll kill them. Because that's the kind of pacifist I was. That's how much, like, I'll kill them before I would kill somebody else, you know? So I think probably between that and then, of course, being in Washington where it is ground zero, and, you know, my school absolutely did the cliche duck and cover kind of thing where we went underneath the desk. We also had a steam tunnel in our school, my elementary school, that we would have to have a drill where we'd go down into these tunnels to shelter. Well, we didn't call it shelter in place. It was basically try to survive, you know, an atomic attack. And I remember they had these cardboard boxes filled with canned water and basically like graham crackers and stuff like that, like just things for like an event of the emergency. So there was a lot of stuff going on. I think being in Washington especially was, as a kid, there was a lot to think about.
I mean, this is very psychologically reductive, just as a preface. But do you think, like, I grew up in like the 80s. I grew up in like a quote unquote kind of in the suburbs in a kind of peaceful time, quote unquote peaceful. But like,
where were you?
In Reading, Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh.
And it was just like, you know, it was a pretty boring, in retrospect, a pretty boring kind of milieu. I don't know. I don't know what word you want to use, but like it made me in a certain way very like kind of like anxious around change. Like anytime there's any kind of change, it makes me very anxious. And I wonder if like, again, like I said, this is psychologically reductive, but I wonder if like growing up in that kind of chaos, if that in any way made you pretty resistant to change, or even like someone who might enjoy change.
You know, I'm sure that our environment had an effect on our psychology. I also am sure that our psychology had an effect on our environment. So,
100%. Yes.
Right. So I feel like I am a long distance runner. I do kind of keep on just doing the thing, but I don't know if I'm resistant to change. I'm certainly not anxious about it. I don't have any, people in my life died. That's a pretty significant change. And I accept it. I accept death as the second most natural thing in life. So that's just the way it goes. And if anything, I would say that for some people living in a chaotic environment, and that could be externally speaking or internally in terms of the family, because there's a lot of chaos in our family too, right? And so for some people, I have siblings. I have 4 siblings. I have 2 older sisters and a younger brother and a younger sister. I'm the middle child. I say that each of us, dealt with the situation, the conditions differently. And I am interested in stability for sure. That doesn't mean a resistance to change. Stability is that no matter what, like whatever the situation is, that you find your balance, that you stay calm and you just stay focused on like, all right, here's like, I see life and society largely as weather patterns. Like I think the current state of affairs is a weather pattern.
Yes.
There's nothing I can do about these fucking bozos down there in the White House any more than I could do about a fucking hurricane. Like I just don't have, sure I can, I suppose I could build a levee where I could, get sandbagged, or I can get out the vote. But either way, I think the reality is that, weather is something that, I always tell people like it's weather. So if, bring an umbrella if it's raining, that's sort of the way I am. And so I think that I think as a result of living like a cork, always floating and top up and just finding that balance, that balance, I think that it gives people the sense that maybe I'm resistant to change, but I'm not. I just roll with it.
Yeah.
I had a friend once said to me, she said, you always find parking spaces. You're so lucky. And I said, I don't always find parking spaces. I just don't complain about it when I don't. Like, that's the difference. I just keep looking and then I'll find it. And then I find it, but I haven't spent the last 10 minutes going like, I can't find a parking space. It's just a different psychology, you know?
Was that difficult to get to that point, or do you think you've been like that since childhood?
I have a defensive streak for sure. I think that probably comes from my family. We're very loquacious and verbally can be very cutting. And so we're quick to come, you had to go quick at the dinner table. You had to, figure out how to come back quick. I think that early on in my teenage year, I was desperate for a family, an extended family beyond my family. And to be clear, I was completely committed to my mom and dad. Still, my mom's dead, but my dad I saw him this morning. So, and my family, we are tight. So it's not, there's no estrangement at all. But I still really wanted to be a part of something outside of my family, because I knew I understood what weaning was. I understood that I was going to leave the nuclear family, right? I was going to leave the base, whatever this family that I grew up in, I was going to be leaving that. And I wanted to have a connection with other people that felt like family to me, which is really, that's punk rock for me. Like, my closest friends are people they're my punk friends.
Yeah.
Like, people I've known them for, I've known Henry Rollins now. It'll be, in 2 years, it'll be 50 years. I've known him for 48 years, and we're best friends. We talk regularly. And my closest friends are people that were, in the trenches with me. So I think in the very beginning of punk rock, of course, coming in the early 79, really, there was first that sort of, 16 years old, there was that initial, fear, because everybody else seems like they just seem like real punks. I felt like a poser. So then I felt, I had that sort of defensive kind of, everyone's like, who are you, kid? And then I'd be like, fuck you, or whatever, so that I built up defenses that way. And then once it was really rolling, I think I really felt a sense of, I was protective because it was so important to me. And that really ended up with a lot of, there was a lot of violence. And there was a point in time, though, where I had conversations with people, and it's a little bit like my story about being a pacifist who would kill the guys coming to collect me to be in war. Like, I was in fights to stop violence, right? And that doesn't make any sense. And I think that there was a period of time where, in the early 80s, where I really started to think about who I wanted to be, who I appeared to be becoming. And I realized, I need to change. This is not who I want. I don't want to be constantly fighting. I don't want to be in that kind of situation. And it was a marriage of my defensiveness and my protectiveness, and my fear resulted in a kind of a pattern, like a behavioral pattern. And I thought, I got to stop. I just got to stop it. And this is also underscored because there's all these skinhead kids showed up around that time, and I couldn't understand their violence at all. Right. Like, I had operated from a sort of I actually had a stated philosophy for my fighting, which was, I bruised the ego and not the body. Mm-hmm. So the idea being that I wasn't scared of people and I wouldn't be scared of them. I would step up to anybody, but I was not sending people to hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in retrospect, I can acknowledge, or I think it was a conceit, that particular philosophy. But even if it was true for me, it wasn't true for the people around me. They were destroying people, but they're my friends. So let's say we're in a situation where a guy comes in and he's messing with somebody, and I go step to this person. I might not send him to a hospital, but somebody else might. So in any event, it was not. I realized that violence was a completely, it's unsustainable, and it's also not consistent with who I thought I was. So I thought, I'm going to stop fighting, which was hard. I thought, well, how does one stop fighting? Because I had felt like I was being pulled into these things all the time. And what I realized was that if one decides that he or she no longer wants to speak the language of violence, then when people who try to talk to them in that language, it's indecipherable. And an example I can give would be, between here at Discord House and the subway, it's about a 15-minute walk up a boulevard. And a lot of cars go by, and a lot of people would yell stuff out of windows. And quite often, someone yells something at me, that would be like, oh, this might pop off into a fight or something. But once I made this decision that I didn't speak that language and they yelled something, I didn't understand them anymore. They couldn't be talking to me because they're calling me a name, but they're not talking to me because I'm not that person. There's nothing to fight about.
Was this like a dawning epiphany? Was there some kind of like incident that was like, oh, this is the final straw, I have to like change? I remember in my 20s, there was just like, I've been kind of like, for a long part of my life, I was kind of like an emotional robot. And then there was just a point, my dad said something to me. He's like, oh, it doesn't seem like you like hugging us. And like that was like this thing that like, oh, wait, maybe I should like be a little more open and start like really working on opening myself up a little more.
I can't remember. There was a cumulative kind of thing going on. One thing is I was 21 years old and I, at that point, I'd been having been in fights for like 3 or 4 years at that point. And, it just seemed, it felt, and then as I said, like this other stuff was happening and these guys were making everybody so miserable. Like these skinhead kids were coming out and there's all these drunk punks and people it just felt, it was ugly. And I didn't like, and I couldn't, and I remember talking to some of the skinheads and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And they said, we're just protecting this scene like you used to. And then I read, oh, violence begets violence. It's just the same old fucking story, but in any event, I realized that I had been, operating on I was just on a false ground. I wasn't being true to myself. And I think it just, once I realized that, then I thought, then I need to just take it. Like I own it. Like I wouldn't deny that I got into, fights but I also know that I clearly, and it wasn't like an epiphany. It wasn't like something happened like this, it wasn't like the classic scene where like, there's a rumble in the street and one guy gets stabbed and we're like, oh no, it was nothing like that. It was actually more about generally this realizing there's just bad energy. It just felt bad. And I also, I couldn't critique people. Like I had no right to say anything to people about beating up kids for their T-shirts or whatever, because I engaged in violence too. So I had to think about my position. There was another somewhat related moment that kind of counts as an epiphany, which was I was walking on a Discord house with a really good friend of mine, and she said to me, I've been thinking about your songs. Now, these are Minor Threat songs she was talking about. And you employ the word no and don't and, like not and all the negative. She was, it's always about things you aren't. And I thought about that, I was like, oh, I don't, of course I was defensive about it, but then later on, of course I thought about it, and I was thinking like, it's true. Like we are, I largely traffic in a kind of an angry disposition, what seems to be an angry disposition. And there was a lot of like, yelling and shouting about no this and no that. And I did some thinking about this, and I thought, well, what is the objective of all of us so-called angry or seemingly angry punks? And the reason I say seemingly is because I think that's ascribed, the angriness. So people, to some degree, if you're playing a song, if you're singing to a song that's very fast and very loud, and you're in a room that's crammed with people, there is a tendency to yell. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that you're always like in a hot rage. Sometimes you're just trying to get some air, and it's exciting, But there was a lot of the people were, a lot of fomenting going on. People were, agitating for change and all this stuff. And I thought, what is the objective? Like, what is ultimately the objective of this work? Like, if I can call it that, like, and I think the objective of the work, and this goes for activists too, is for peace and goodness and happiness, and joy. I think that's the objective, right? That people are well. And I decided that I was going to affect those changes in the areas in which I have control. Mm-hmm. And the area that I have control is myself. Because I thought, like, live well, be happy, see life as rich, appreciate joy, experience it. And then you have the strength and the courage. You literally are encouraged, to be encouraged to fight for change.
Right.
But, I often think about, there's been a lot of political groups over the years that I've talked to, and not just political groups, but people who are, and you talk to them and they're just miserable. And who wants to be a part of that? Not me. They're miserable. And I think, well, what's the point of this? Like, what is the point? If you're miserable, it's just not the way I am. So I think that I decided, that was early 80s. I said, I'm going to try to live life fully and then not in lieu of other people, but on behalf of other people.
Yeah.
To be kind. Why the fuck not?
Yeah, I mean, it's two things. One, it's a very existentialist point of view, right? And it goes back to the thing you were saying before about, the everything being this kind of like weather pattern and what you can control, right? I think that's definitely like this second stage. So, and the second thing I wanted to say, which is like the second stage where after like, you're trying to find your identity, all the like no stuff, all the don't, all the like prescriptions that I think were in Minor Threat that I think, to be totally honest, really helped me as a teenager and really helped me, when I discovered your music in like the early 90s, and, it helped me figure out who I want to be in this oppositional phase, right? And that's that first stage of finding your identity. But also in a sense, like this anger, I mean, tell me if this is true or not, but like, some of the stuff from like living through that like very tumultuous period in the 60s had to be very traumatic. And I have to assume that some of that anger was working out those things, right? That were maybe like inchoate inside you. Like, I mean, like just the idea of like, I think about my parents a lot who they were born in 1950 and we're Jewish and they were right in the wake of the Holocaust. My grandfather fought in World War II. They had to go through all the same kind of like, fire drills for nuclear war. And I really think that that's such a like, it starts you off in a kind of like, gives you this like kind of inchoate fear and anger inside of you. Cause it's like the world could explode at any moment and you don't know when it's going to happen.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think that you might be engaging a little bit of connecting the dots here.
Oh, 100% armchair psychology.
Because I have to tell you, I have to say that I have friends who went to the same high school, grew up in Washington with me, who exactly the same age, who never were singers in punk bands, never yelled about stuff, never. So did my childhood affect me? Well, of course, our childhoods affect us, but I can't say that. I think it would be, yes, of course, growing up when I did produced who I am to some degree, of course, but that's true for everybody who grew up at that time, regardless of how they ended up. But I don't think that there are plenty of people now who are, singing bands who are in their, say, late teens or early 20s, who didn't grow up in the 60s, and they're also have a sense of outrage and they're thoughtful and all, whatever. I think that, first off, to be clear, I stand behind every lyric I ever wrote. And those songs, like the Minor Threat songs, they were written for good. I didn't write those things for bad. And in fact, I was thinking about this the other day that, like a song like Stand Up, for instance, it really was a song about your friendship, and most of my songs, I mean, frankly, everybody in every one of those songs pretty much was about my friends, Bottle Violence, or, I mean, In My Eyes is is essentially a conversation with the entire scene, and then when you get to Out of Step on that record, I mean, Betray, Look Back and Laugh, these are sob stories. These are all songs about friendship and connections. And the last song we wrote, Salad Days, is also about the way people about friendships, but through the sort of what I see as the deceptive nostalgia that people use to not continue to go forward because they think they've passed their prime. And I don't ever think that. I'm always trying to be in the moment. So, I'm not dismissing those songs at all. And the fact that you were affected by that music, is great. And congratulations, because that was your work. You did that, not me. I wrote the songs, but they resonated with you. That's transmit. Like, I can be in charge of transmission, but reception is you. And you're the one who made that work that way. The same way, I listened to fucking Ted Nugent, of all people, in the 70s. And I somehow gleaned from Ted Nugent a sense of righteousness about literally about animal rights. He had a song called Great White Buffalo, and about how the buffalo are taking, they're going to come back and destroy the white man who destroyed them. And, and also Nuge, he was a hunter in the 70s, and he boasted that he only ate the meat that he himself had killed, which seemed so radical an idea in the mid 70s. To me, I didn't know anybody. Everybody just bought their meat in little packages. They didn't take any responsibility for what was going on. So the fact he said that, I thought this guy is a full-on, like, progressive animal rights guy. That was me. It's my filter. It's like, I'm like, it's the Rorschach is like, that's like, my throat was a Rorschach for you. And you gleaned something from that. That was you. And that's the thing about music. So when people say, thank you so much for that, all the work, your music meant so much to me. I always say, on behalf of music, you're welcome. I can accept those thanks on behalf of music, because really music kicked my ass and I only intend to return the favor. That was it. I don't know, that's all. I wasn't thinking like, I'm going to have people thanking me. It's actually weird sometimes. Not that you did, but quite often people will say, God, your music meant so much to me. And I'm like, great. Well done. Congratulations. That's good work you did.
Was there any ego in it though? Because like, and I asked that because also like you grew up in this kind of like left leaning Episcopal liberation theology. And I wonder if there's if you have a feeling more of selflessness, because I have a lot of ego involved in my work, and it's very tough for me to pull my ego out of that or to deny my ego in some way.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, have you done therapy or something? Do you do?
Yes,
like,
yes, I've been in therapy for years.
Yeah. Right. See, I've never done therapy, so I don't have that kind of, I'm one of my closest, dearest friends in the world is a therapist. So it's nothing like, and people I know have benefited greatly and amazingly from it, but it also, therapy employs language. Like, I just never even thought about like I can't parse the ego. Like you're talking about yourself, like, well, ego played a huge role in that. I'm like, I don't know. I guess, I don't know. Did it? I always feel like that's somebody else have to make that. Somebody else have to make that assessment. I mean, I don't know. How would one measure that? How would that manifest? How could I identify whether my ego was playing a starring role in this?
If you this is how I think about it. If someone thanks you, like, or says like your music meant a lot to me or your work means a lot to me, and you get a little juice from that to me is the kind of like the ego part of my brain being like, they are thanking you specifically. You have made a difference in someone's life with the things you've made. Obviously we're working on very different scales, but like that little juice it like, it helps me.
No, I don't think of it as like a little juice or charge, but I will say that there are times where people say something to me about the music and I really believe them. I mean, there was a time that, I was in the Evens with Amy and we were playing a show somewhere in the south of France. And there was a woman in the front row and we went into a song and she just burst into tears. And it was such a beautiful moment. And I felt so indebted to her for that, because that's the way music makes me feel. So if I was able to concoct, along with Amy in this circumstance, if I was able to organize sound and create an environment in which somebody would feel safe to present that way, I was so appreciative of that. But I don't think I felt like, score one for MacKaye, I don't think like that, I guess. I do feel, but honestly, it is the transcendent nature of those moments that compels me to continue.
Yeah.
Man, that's the whole point, to leave the room, like to create a moment in which everything disappears.
Yeah. I mean, besides going to church, was
actually, let me qualify something
Sure.
for you, because I want to make sure this is clear. I am not a subscriber. Both my parents my dad is a theologian. My mother was Catholic. My dad was Episcopalian. She converted to Episcopalianism specifically to marry my dad. This church was so radical. It was almost like a Unitarian church. It just was not that heavy on religion. And if anything, it put me well out of religion, because what I saw in the church, and my dad still is a member of that church, honestly, or not honestly, he's still a member of that church. But my father, he's been involved with the vestry and the whole politics of the church. And I find the politics of churches to be so distasteful and off-putting and inconsistent with the way I understand what the mission would be. I as soon as I had an opportunity to get out of there, I did. And that was my mom. My mom and dad were sort of estranged, and my mom was like, I'm out. I'm not going to church anymore. And I think me and my siblings were like, yay, we're not going either. My dad never stopped going. But so that was 74. So I'll go with my dad still. I do. And it's an important church. They actually, it is still a super radical church. And we have shows there, punk shows. There's long for years and years and years. It's a great punk venue. There's the Washington Peace Center was housed there. The We Are Family senior citizen, low-income senior citizen operations there. Thrive DC's there. Positive Force DC was there. Like all these, they have like a whole building filled with righteous, progressive organizations. They do great work. Like it's the kind of place when it was, pre-pandemic, but you would go in there and there might be like a hip hop cipher in one room and a sewing circle in another room and a fucking drum circle in the third room, circles every fucking where. And I actually love the place and support it, but I am not a religious person at all, just to be clear. So I would say that the congregation and the radicalness of that church really taught me to question authority, and to assume that your government is lying to you.
Yeah.
And I would say that was pretty fucking good lessons. But frankly, public schools had another huge impact on me. Public schools taught me A, how to wait in line, to be patient, and B, never ask for permission, because a bureaucrat's answer is always no.
Huh.
So you just do it. So for instance, like all the shows we put on here in DC, we don't pull permits for these things. Like the outdoor shows, when you're down the mall or the National Mall or on federal property, you have to get permits. But all these benefit gigs, they're not like technically legal. They were not technically legal. We just did the shows. Why do we need to pay someone to do the show? This is a benefit. We just don't ask for permission because the answer would be no. You just prepare to apologize, So, right, that's it. And to be, it's just sort of that plays in. So DCPS had a huge impact on me. I mean, massive, and I'm grateful for it. I think public schools are deeply important environments. People, say like, why aren't you worried about the education? I said, here's the thing about school. Like public schools are pretty much the only time in a person's life in which he or she will spend almost a daily basis with a wide range of people of any stripe, of any walk of life. And they're only assembled because they happen to be born at a certain year or a certain period of time. Never again will this happen. In the future, you might have a job and you might be a lot of people working that job, but they all got hired by the same company and they have different kind of aims. You might go to jail, but everyone's a criminal. You might go to war, but because you're in the army, that kind of collective thing, that is how you learn about living in the world that we live in. It's filled with a wide variety of people. And I'm so grateful. I think that private schools, I'm not trying to beef on them, but I do think that they are selective, literally selective. And quite often it's a matter of how much you can afford.
Yeah.
And I feel like that the lessons, I understand that there's risks in public schools. It may not exist in private schools, but maybe those risks are a good thing to think about. I had this sort of vision of, if you had two people in matching kayaks and they had to cross the same body of water, one of them sets off and it's 70 degrees and a crystal clear blue sky and water like glass. And the other one sets off and there's a thunderstorm and terrible winds and choppy waters, unpredictable currents. When they both get to the other side, who's the better rower? That's how I look at it. So I think sometimes the strife that you encounter by being a part of accepting society as a whole, sometimes that's what makes you the better rower. It's how you got through, how you navigated. You weren't being carried through.
I mean, did you see this philosophy? Did your parents kind of like back up these ethical beliefs at home? Like your dad, I know he was a reporter, right, for the Washington Post before he was a theologian.
He's a theologian first. He was he was in seminary to be an Episcopal priest in the 50s, and he left to marry my mom and have children.
Really?
And then he became just a regular newspaper guy working for a wire service. Then they moved to New York and then went to Minneapolis. They were in New York and then they moved to Minneapolis working for this newspaper. And then he was on a wire service and he got the White House beat and they moved back to Washington, which when I was born. And my father was, he was on the White House press corps. And my father's very first trip with the president was to Dallas, Texas in 1962 or 63. In November of 63. That was his first trip.
Oh God.
Right. So he was in the motorcade. But then he was with the White House with Johnson until 66, at which point the Washington Post came over and they headhunted him. They wanted to have a religion column. So he got hired to do one of the earliest columns just about religion. And he did that for about 7 or 8 years. Then he got involved with in 1975, there was a terrible pressman strike at the Washington Post. Got very ugly. And my father, who's a part of the Writers Guild, and in the leadership position, he with the other leaders led the guild out on strike. And we were on strike for 6 months. No work. It was a family of 5 on $90 a month. And it was hard. And, but my father certainly had principles. And of course, I'm sure that played a huge role, and my mom was also super, just brilliant thinker. But I can't say the philosophies, my kind of weird philosophy stuff, that's just me. My dad, I'll be talking to my dad and I'll start breaking. He's like, oh, stop, because, he knows I'm right, but,
But I mean, that is interesting, though, that there was, like, you grew up with someone who had at some point felt a calling, right? If you're going to...
My dad has always felt, he still feels a calling. He's 86 and he's still kicking ass. Yeah. My dad, he's like, he's St. Bill MacKaye. That's who he is.
I think having something like that in your life, or someone like that in your life who has felt that and continues to feel that to this day, right? I think that's an important force, especially to choose, to be in a certain career, right? To play music for 40, 50 years, right? To continue on that path, or and as you talk about, you say you have this very patient kind of philosophy, right? To be on that path for a long time. It's not the same thing, but there's some kind of analogy, it feels like, with the idea of your father having this calling.
I don't know. I don't know. I
I'm reaching.
So.
I 100% acknowledge I am reaching.
I mean, first off, I don't think it was a career. I just think it was what I do, which is it's semantic, but it's different.
Yeah.
I don't ever, and my father, I think that the MacKayes were peculiar people. I mean, my father, he doesn't even own a television. He is not interested. He just wants to read. He's a great cook, like he's a brilliant cook. He can make a pie from scratch, and he cuts the apples he cuts them with a knife, like he pares them with a knife. He doesn't even use any devices. He's just that kind of guy. And he's like a Renaissance person, but he's also, he's complicated and makes a mess of things. But he's living in the same house that he's lived in since 1962. There's not a lot of, we just sort of keep on rolling. I mean, as I said, I was there this morning. I went by and tried to help fix a light fixture. And I see him we have tea every Wednesday afternoon. And for a year, until the pandemic, the MacKaye family, all of us are here. I have one sister. She and her wife live in Oakland, but the rest of us, my younger brother, my younger sister, and their spouses, my older sister, and me and my family, like we would get together every Sunday for dinner, and my dad cooked. He's 86 years old, or 80. He was 85. Now he's 86. But it's just the way we operate, and But yeah, of course my father's sort of principles. I will say that my father has had principles that I certainly affected me, and my mother had a pragmatism to her, as well as my mother. I think more than my father, my mother saw people as people. She didn't treat, like my friends, when my mom died, a lot of my friends said what they loved about my mother is that she always treated them as equals. Like she's like, let's just have a conversation. It wasn't sort of like, you kids. It was like, and that's sort of it's kind of the way I am. I think everybody's real. I think, I think a kid is real. I don't think people under the age of something are not real. It's one of I think the true follies of our society is that the sort of notion that young people are not real. And the proof that I have for this is that this question that so many parents and adults have, which is, what are you going to do when you have to get real? Like, when are you going to get a real job? So when you say those sort of things, it really does underscore this notion that you're not real. And if you are made to feel not real, then what difference does it make what the fuck you do? Like, what difference does it make? Like, you might as well fuck up because you're not real. And at some point you will get real. It's like this fucking ridiculous born again thing where, like, you can do anything you want, but at some point you'll get the ding from Jesus, and then that everything, and you're all clear. And I think it's like, I just find it, I think people should be present and take responsibility for their actions and realize that they're real. So I think my mom certainly gave me, like, probably imparted that. She'd say, yeah, like, you're real. You decide, like, what you want to do. I mean, my parents, I often say that my family were really supportive, or my parents are supportive, but I didn't understand until years later that was code for they paid for things. But that's not the case not in my world. Quite the opposite. Like, my parents really had no or very little money, and they've been happy to take the money off of me. What they supported me on was, I said, like, I'm not going to go to school. I'm not going to go to college. And they said, okay, if that's what you follow your heart, do what's right for you. So that's what I did. And I remember when I was 29 years old, I was here at Discord House. I was cleaning my room, and I was listening to the first Led Zeppelin album. And there's a song on there called Your Time Is Gonna Come, which I always love this song. And I was listening to the lyrics, and Robert Plant is singing about, like, he's singing to his girlfriend or a woman who he lived with, like, you've been running around town smoking other people's cigarettes or some bullshit like that. And I'm thinking, like, I'm listening to it, and I'm suddenly struck. I'm like, God, these are really like adult lyrics. And I was thinking about all my lyrics, like, wah, 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 don't do this, don't do that, so I was thinking about it. And I was like, I'm 29. I'm still singing like a kid. Here he is. And he was 18 when he wrote those songs. Like, he had an apartment with a lived with somebody in an apartment. Like I lived in a group house. Like I was, and so I kind of had this moment where like, the world was like, oh my God, I never grew up, and I called my father up and I said, I don't think I ever grew up. I'm 29. I don't, what the fuck? I never grew up. And my dad said, well, he said, I can tell you two things. One, when I see you, I think of you as an adult. You're a grown up. I said, oh. He says, the other thing I can tell you is I'm 64 and I can't believe I'm not a kid. And then that's exactly what I probably need to hear. That, that we are what we are. So that's why when people talk about, like when someone says to me like, oh, we're so old, we're getting old and that kind of shit. I don't want to hear about it because really, if you're hungry, make some toast. And if you're cold, put on a jacket. If you're thirsty, have, some iced tea. If you're bored, take a walk or read a book, but you can't do shit about being old. There's no antidote. You just are. So there's no such thing as being old. You just are. You just woke up. That's all you got to do every day. Wake up and you are. And that's all you can be. And that's how I live. So I don't want to hear about being old. We just are.
But we're right at the end, but I think it's really interesting. Like I struggle with that, like the feeling of like, I still feel like I'm young, yet I know I'm getting older. And I struggle with that all the time. Whereas you seem to have found some peace in that, or have always had some peace around
I would say, except for that moment where I listened to Led Zeppelin, where I was like, whoa, I would encourage you and anybody to not struggle, because all that struggling is taking up your time, like your life. And I would recommend a cup of tea and take a walk, and then, that's what I would do. I would say do that, because really, if you're in a vehicle, the only thing that you have any control over are the levers that are within reach. And you can't do shit about how old you are. You were born, when you were born in the 80s or 70s?
Yeah. Oh, 79.
Okay. So can you affect that? Can you change that?
Nope.
No. So then shut the fuck up. It's nothing to do. If you're doing better than the majority of the people who ever lived, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like most people in the history of the world are dead now. Right? Although I wonder if there's going to get to a point in time where the living population is equal to or greater than all of the people who've died in the past.
Oh no.
That's an interesting, that'd be something for you to think about. But the truth is, I always have, like, I was walking with my son when my son was born. He's 12 now. And for the first 2 years of his life, I took him on a walk every morning, no matter what. Since he was an infant, like the day he came home, we went for a walk. And we went for a walk, rain, snow, it didn't matter. We're going out for 45 minutes or an hour, whatever it is. Freezing cold, we're going to do it. The only time that I turned around was because it was sheets of ice and I fell. And I can't fall carrying a child. And so one day I was walking, it was a warm, not terribly warm, but it was raining. And I was walking down the street and I saw a homeless guy who, and I said, good morning. And he said, good morning. And he said, how you doing today? And I said, I'm good. It's a beautiful day. And he says, it's always a beautiful day in the land of the living. And he's right. If we made it, it's a beautiful day. So I think that, and this guy, he was on the street. So I always think, I think about all we got to do is wake up, and then don't fuck up. That's all.
Ian, that seems like a really nice place to end, actually. Thank you so much for doing this.
I don't know if we talked about childhood, but there it is.
It's there. It's there. I think it gives me a lot more perspective. So thank you very much. and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.